What?
I see the cat painting in the back now. I heard you talk about.
Oh, well, my daughter was a painter, and she had painted many, many, many cat paintings. She adored cats. So,
It's a wonderful painting though back there.
yeah, she was really, really talented
I'm
artist.
sort of captivated, Rosemary, by the cat painting, and Brooke by your cute hat.
Oh, yeah.
Brooke,
It's a
Brooke, are you an intern or what are you doing? What are you assistant or are you Jonathan's assistant?
Yeah, I'm the communications and events coordinator for the Pat Conroy Center.
Oh, oh, okay. That must be quite a job.
Yeah, it is. It's fun. I was telling Judy I get to meet a lot of people,
Yeah,
and
get to meet a lot of people. Yeah, yeah. So,
all right.
well,
I think
I feel honored to be here because Pat and I go way, way back. I'm from Atlanta. I live in Savannah now, and I've lived here since 1976. But Pat and I knew each other in Atlanta long, long, long ago, a very long time ago. And I used to go to book signings for him at a bookstore called the Old New York Bookstore in Atlanta. I met his dad. I remember his dad one time said to me when he just gotten a big movie deal on The Great Santini, and his dad said, I said, you must be really proud of Pat. He said, "Yeah, I've been trying to beat some sense in that boy's head my whole life." But, I felt like I knew his sister and Carol. And then long before he met Pat, Cassandra came to a writing workshop I led in Black Mountain, and he just started dating Sandra. But he used to come to my writing workshops here in Savannah, Zona Rosa, and he'd be our special author guest. He would joke because I would never let him in till 4:30 in the afternoon because it was all women. So we'd have him at the end. And I remember when he was doing beach music, he brought a manuscript and it was this big. It was all to type pages. It was 1,000 pages. Then Nan DeLeese, your editor, was his editor for that. And she insisted that he come and stay with her in her apartment while she supervised him cutting down the manuscript, decreasing the length of it because it was so long. But we had lots of mutual friends, and over the years we even went to the same psychotherapist at one point. But we really, really had good times. But how should we do this, Brooke? You want?
I think we are live now, so we have an
Yeah.
audience. So yes, I'm gonna introduce you both, and then we're gonna get started with our conversation. And
Okay,
yeah, so
okay.
yeah, we're live. Welcome everyone to our conversation with Rosemary Daniell and Judy Goldman. Um, I'm going to introduce them both before we get started. About our authors, Rosemary Daniell's recent award-winning collection of poems is The Murderous Sky, Poems of Madness and Mercy. Her widely reviewed books include her memoir, Fatal Flowers, on sin, sex, and suicide in the Deep South. Along with her second memoir, Sleeping with Soldiers, they were forerunners of the current memoir trend. She is the author of 7 other books of poetry and prose, including a novel, The Hurricane Season, The Woman Whose Secrets of the Zona Rosa, How Writing in Sisterhood Can Change Women's Lives, as profiled in Southern Living and People. Her work has appeared in such publications as the New York Times Book Review, New York Woman, LA Times, and many others. And she has appeared on numerous national television shows. She is the founder and leader of the Zona Rosa, a series of writing and living workshops. Pat Conroy was a frequent visitor. To date, over 350 Zona Rosans and counting have become published authors. She is profiled in the book Feminists Who Changed America, 1963 through 1975, and in 2008 received a Governor's Award in the Humanities for her impact on the state of Georgia. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you, Brooke.
Yep, and our other featured writer today is Judy Goldman, who is the author of 7 books. They are both super accomplished. 3 memoirs, 2 novels, and 2 collections of poetry. Her new memoir, Child, will be published May 2022. Together, A Memoir of a Marriage and a Medical Mishap was named one of the best books of 2019 by Real Simple magazine and received a starred review from Library Journal. Her first memoir, Losing My Sister, was a finalist for both SIBA's Memoir of the Year and Forward Review's Memoir of the Year. She received the Sir Walter Raleigh Fiction Award and the Mary Ruffin Poole Award for First Fiction, as well as the 3 prizes awarded for a poetry book by North Carolinian and Silverfish Review Press's Gerald Cable Prize. She received the Hobson Award for Distinguished Achievement in Arts and Letters, the Fortner Writer and Community Award for Outstanding Generosity to other writers in the larger community, the Irene Blair Honeycutt Lifetime Achievement Award from Central Piedmont Community College, and the Beverly D. Clark Author Award from Queen's University. Her work has appeared in Southern Review, Gettysburg Review, Kenyon Review, Crazy Horse, Ohio Review, Shenandoah, Prairie Schooner, Washington Post, USA Today, The Charlotte Observer, Real Simple, Lit Hub, and elsewhere. She lives in Charlotte, North Carolina with her husband. They have 2 married children and 4 grandchildren. Thank you, Judy, for being here.
Thank you.
Wow, very impressive bios. So yeah, we're going to get started with our conversation. If anyone in our audience has a question, you can put here in the chat box and we can ask as we go along.
Is that, did you see that Judy and I, how we discussed doing it? Did you see that? Or do you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I figure y'all can talk, amongst yourselves, but, I have a few questions, and then I'm pretty sure some people in the audience will also have some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
You run it, Brooke, the way you think to run it. That's good. We're happy.
Yeah.
Well, I figure since we're doing the Pat Conroy for the literary festival, we would begin just by asking, like, both of you knew Pat, and like maybe each of you could talk about like the role he had in championing both of your writing.
That's a really good question. Rosemary, should I just jump in?
Go ahead.
Okay. So my editor, I had written 2 books of poetry and had just was about to have my first novel published, and my editor sent the review copy to Pat asking if he would write a blurb for it. I didn't know that. But my husband and I were eating breakfast on the screen porch, and my phone rings, and I pick up, and there's this voice saying, "Judy, Pat Conroy here. You've written about Jews." So I said, "Well, are you going to read it even though it's about Jews?" And he said, "That's my story. That's my story about Jews." So then, and I'm saying to my husband, "It's Pat Conroy on the phone." I couldn't believe it. I'd never met him or anything. And for the next day and a half, Pat called me about every hour to comment on my book. And then when he finished, he was so adorable about it. And I was such a new person to publishing with a New York publisher that I was stunned by his attention. And at the end, he said, "So you've let me into your world, and I want you to come into my world. This coming weekend, my daughter's getting married in Fripp Island, and I want you and your husband to come to the wedding." And I said, "We can't come to the wedding. You need to just invite family and close friends to the wedding. You and I have never even met." He said, no, you're coming. Okay. So my husband and I go to his daughter's wedding 5 days after he reads my book. We meet at the wedding. All weekend, I just picture his big, warm, friendly arm around my shoulders, introducing us to all his family. And, different family members are saying, "Now you're who?" Nobody could figure out why we were there. But I was not unusual. He did that with so many writers. He put that big, burly, warm arm around their shoulders. That's my story.
That's very good, Judy. That's so true. That is so true. So true. He gave me the best blurbs I ever received. He was just the greatest at giving blurbs. I know toward the end of his life, he was getting overwhelmed with that. And Sandra said he just couldn't deal with all the mail that he was getting, all the books that he was receiving. but he was so supportive, so incredibly supportive. I just loved him. He was emotionally supportive of me a lot of times in my life when I needed that. Um, my daughter's baby had died of crib death, and I was scheduled to go to Laramie to Wyoming to teach for a semester as visiting writer, and after going to the service for her child, my husband drove me to Wyoming, and they put me up in a little apartment. And the first thing I did was call Pat, and Pat was such a comfort to me because he had a lot of the kinds of things in his family that I have had in mine. And he just was always so understanding, and really, really wonderful person. We used to call our little writing group when he was coming before he met Sandra. We'd call it the Pat Conroy dating service, because it was all women. But I don't think he actually went out with any of them. He enjoyed being there with them. But I remember that when he first started dating Cassandra, I heard about, she wrote me, or she told me that she'd met Pat Conroy and that they were in love. And I thought maybe it was some fantasy she had, but and it turned out it was true. And Sandra and I were already friends at that point because of her being in one of my workshops. And she'd already published a book herself at that time. So that's about all I can think of. I just love Pat, though. I just adored him.
All right. Well, thank you. I always enjoy hearing Pat's stories because, of course, I never got to meet him. So I've learned a lot about him by hearing people's stories that knew him. So another question that I was going to ask. So I know both of you write in multiple genres. And as far as just the art of storytelling, I know like poetry versus prose, specifically memoir. I was wondering if maybe you both could talk about how sort of the art of storytelling, how it goes into both of those genres. Like what's the difference in how you approach telling a story through poems or either through short stories or memoir? If that makes any sense.
Well, I'm a really unlikely person to have ever had a book published. I was a high school dropout, and I had 3 small children.
Those are the best writers.
Huh? What?
Those are the best writers.
Yeah. Well, by age 23, and so then I was taking this modern poetry class at Emory University, and I just fell in love with it. That's all I can say. It was like an evangelical experience. And I just started reading all this modern poetry. And then these Emory professors invited me to be in a little workshop with them. And James Dickey came to lead our workshop. And, I just was totally immersed in poetry. I didn't write anything but poetry, but for 12 years. And my first published book was poetry. That was truly my love. And I reviewed books, poetry books for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I did it because I got the free books. I got the books free, and that was a great learning experience for me, reviewing all those other poets' books. And when I came to memoir, my first prose book was a memoir, Fatal Flowers, on sin, sex, and suicide in the Deep South. First I had a book of poetry published. This was my first book, A Sexual Tour of the Deep South. It's all about sexual politics. I was very influenced at that time by the women's movement, which was just beginning, second wave feminism. And that inspired me to write the book. It was very controversial, in Atlanta, where I lived at that point in time. But also, a lot of women, would come up to me and say, well, I'd written exactly what they felt, but had never been able to say. But on the basis of that book, I was able to get a contract to write with the same publisher, Fatal Flowers. And I remember that when I signed the contract, this was actually before memoir became known as a genre, because I remember the contract read that I would write 200 pages on the subject of Southern women. That's all the contract said. 200 pages on, and I didn't know how I was going to do that, because I'd never written anything longer than a poem. I wrote a lot of magazine articles for the Atlanta magazine, and so I signed that contract. And one thing Judy had mentioned to me was that she thought I was extremely honest in my writing. That has always been a criteria for me. But I remember that the night I signed the contract to write Fatal Flowers, I dreamed that night I would be shot because I knew I planned to write in a totally honest way. And then quickly after I had that thought, that went away, because I thought, well, it's not worth writing unless I write it in a totally honest way. It's got to be honest. And one of my mainstays of my writing life has been from Keats' poem Ode to a Grecian Urn. Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. That's all you can know on earth and all you need to know. And so and Pat told me he later told me he had that same experience at dreaming that he would, if he told the truth, that that someone would shoot him or something, but at a poetry reading or whatever. And one other writer told me that. So it must not be that uncommon. But then when I sat down to write, I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to write 200 pages? And it turned out to be, of course, 400 and something pages. It took me 3 years to write. The contract said 1 year, but I had to get more time. So that was basically, and doing that was very different from writing the poetry. And you asked about the difference in the poetry and I believe that's what you asked about, the poetry and the prose. Well, I always write poetry, but I would just keep the drafts, because whenever I'm writing a book-length book, prose book, I have to set the poems aside for the time being. So I just have a bunch of first drafts, and then I go back and work on them. But they are alike to me in certain ways. And I will say that, and I know Judy's written poetry too, that I believe that writing poetry is really good for a person as a prose writer. And I always recommend this to my writing students, that they read poetry, because poetry is a very heightened form, and it's helps us to develop a style and everything. I remember one thing about writing that first book, though. I didn't know anything about dialogue. I didn't know how to do dialogue. And so I just sat around. I would listen to people. If I went to a Waffle House or I was somewhere out, I learned to listen to people talk, and I would write down things they said. And that became my strength, actually, once I learned how to do that, to get the dialogue verbatim and speak like the people spoke. And that book has a lot of dialect in it. I wanted the reader to be able to know what Southerners sound like, even if they live in Nova Scotia or somewhere. And I think I went a little bit overboard, but I did get mail from all over the world. So apparently it worked, for a lot of people, the dialect, to help them to hear how Southerners sound when they speak.
So, okay, we're talking about different writers who write in different genres. I started out in poetry, but I have to go back further than that. In the 3rd grade, I'm going to go all the way back to 8 years old, I started keeping a diary, and I started writing poems. And I kept diaries all through school. I wrote every single day, the full page for every day. My older sister started the same time I did, and she was done with her diary by January 5th. And I kept mine all the way through December 31st. She thought that was the biggest waste of time, that I wrote in those diaries all the time. She didn't know that I was in training to write memoir when I was much older. But when I started taking myself seriously as a writer, and I want to say this purposefully, I was 40 when I started writing poetry and really
Really?
taking workshops and taking myself seriously as a writer. I started at 40. And I also want to add, so I wrote poetry all that time. I loved writing poetry. It felt like writing in my diary. It felt like the poems I had written in the 3rd grade. It felt like home to me. And I kept writing poetry until all of a sudden, the lines in my poems were getting longer and longer. And they weren't looking like stanzas anymore. They were starting to look like paragraphs. And I realized that I was really yearning to write prose, but I didn't know how to do it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, and I want to say an age again, because if you think that the train has left the station for you, I'm here to tell you that you can be any age and begin. So I started writing my first novel when I was 53, and it was published when I was 58. And I really like to tell people that, because you're never too old to begin something new.
Judy, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, I really like to tell people that. And I ended up writing 2 novels, having both of them published, but I never should have had those novels published. When I read those novels, oh my gosh, I cringe. I am not a person who can invent. I don't like to make things up. I like to write out of my own experience. So in fact, my first novel was a veiled memoir of my older sister and me.
Oh.
And I tell writers all the time, you have to write about what keeps you up at night. You need to write out of your obsession. And I was obsessed with a sister relationship, but I didn't think that I had the right to write it straight out as a memoir. So I wrote it as a novel. Okay, fast forward. Now I'm thinking, I'm not really good at inventing. I'm not good at making things up. So I decided to write my first memoir, which was called Losing My Sister. And it was all about my relationship with my sister. Second memoir, Together, a memoir of a marriage and a medical mishap. I'll say a little bit about that. That came out in 2019. My husband had back problems, went in for an epidural. It's a very common procedure. A lot of people have it. In fact, a lot of women have epidurals in childbirth. It's very common. However, something went terribly wrong when he had his epidural, and he was instantly paralyzed from the waist down. So I start with that incident in that memoir, but what the memoir is really about, it's about the changes that all of us experienced in our relationships. It's about the slow, gradual changes brought about by time, and it's about the sudden, dramatic ones, like my husband. How do we adjust? How do we cope? How do we deal with those changes within ourselves and within the relationship? So the next age I want to mention is, and this is all in the service of encouraging all of you, no matter how old you are. I am 80, and my next memoir is coming out next May. And that memoir, the title is Child. It tells the story of my relationship with the Black woman who worked for my family, lived with my family, and raised me. It tells the story of the unconscionable scaffolding on which that relationship was built and the great love. It also tells the story of the daughter she left behind in order to raise me. So I hope I've encouraged you by telling you my age all along the way. And I want to say one more thing, talking about poetry versus fiction versus memoir. Memoir is where I am now. I do not write poetry anymore. I do not write fiction anymore. Poetry was the language of feeling. Memoir is the language of feeling. This feels like my place, memoir. This is what I feel most comfortable doing.
Yeah, I adored your book, Together. I just love it. It's what my favorite memoir of that year, I believe.
Thank you.
And I tell you
Oh,
something,
thank you.
whenever I see in the New York Times, see ads for this surgery that's guaranteed to heal your back, it
Yeah.
really irritates me because I'm reading that. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to Child too. You don't mind if we respond to one another, do you?
Thank you.
Brooke?
Oh no, go ahead.
I just saw here on the corner of my screen, one of my writing students who lives in Minnesota, she's trying to get in here, and she was saying, help. How can she get in? I'd have to go back to my email to send her the.
Let's see. So is she, because we're like in a webinar, so she should still be able to see us and put something in the chat box, or is she trying to get inside of the.
She's trying to get on Zoom to do it.
Oh, okay.
Do
you have the link? Do you have that link to send to her?
Well, I'll have to go to my email for a sec. Should I do that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Let me go there.
I don't have her email, or I could send it to her. But yeah, if you want to open it and just.
Yeah, I'll do this for a minute. Okay, here it is.
Okay.
I'll send it to her. Okay.
Should we chat while that's going on, Brooke?
Yeah.
What would you like to chat about?
Well, my next question was to ask, y'all know each other, and I was curious as to know like how your lives have intersected and how that happened, and is it related to writing or just wanted to know how y'all
that. I think I'll say that while Rosemary's working, and then she can come in when she wants to. One of the great bonuses of being a writer is meeting other writers. I mean, that has been the thrill of it for me, totally. And so, of course, weekends like this literary festival at the Pat Conroy Center would be a perfect example of that. But all of these different workshops that are held all over the country, for those of us who travel to them and are on a panel or teach a workshop, it means we get to meet other writers. And I met Rosemary. We were both on a panel together in New Orleans years ago, in fact, Rosemary, right? And it was an interesting panel because I don't know whether you remember it, Rosemary, there were 4 of us. So here's Rosemary and me, who are writing very personal memoirs. And then there are 2 historians on the panel. One was Shelby Foote, and I can see the other man, Curtis, but I can't remember his last name. They were historians, very erudite. I mean, so it was an interesting panel, I would say. I kept feeling like I don't belong on this panel. And I was very glad Rosemary was on the panel, another memoirist, but that's how we met.
Well,
and we've kept loosely in touch.
Judy, you're the only thing I remember about the panel.
Oh, that's funny. Well, Shelby Foote, let me say one more thing. Shelby Foote had fallen down the night before and he was bruised. And so I was just sort of taking care of him in the panel. I was sort of, I was a nurse on that panel rather than a writer because I was taking care of Shelby Foote.
That's great. That's a great story. Yes, I just remember distinctly meeting you there, and also the title of your book, because it was a subject, I believe the subject was losing my sister. And family stuff is always really, really moving to me. And I have one sister I'm very close with, and, I've thought about that some, but that happened to you very young, that you lost your sister. But I'll say one thing. One of your books is a novel. When I looked up all the books you've written, and I have to say I want to read that one, Leaving Early. You said that writing novels was not your thing, but that's, and I read the description of it. It made me want to read it. It really did.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I really do.
Well, let me ask you a question, Rosemary. When you read books that you wrote a long time ago, do you think, oh, good job, Rosemary, or do you cringe? Which is it?
Well, I hate to say this, but I really am pretty impressed with them.
Oh, that's
I
good.
can't. This is my novel. This is my one novel, The Hurricane Season, set in New Orleans, and I would say now it's what we call autofiction. In other words, it was an it was a fictional account of what happened in my life, which later has become another book. My two children had major mental illnesses, and I was trying to get that outside me and put it on the page. And my husband says this is his favorite of all my books, and I didn't know what I was doing, when I did it, but um, that was really the only that's really the only fiction book that I've written. And some of my students are doing that now, and they have that new name for it because a lot of people use a lot of fictional elements, and then with this fiction involved also. So what was the question? I forgot now. Oh, did I cringe? No, I have to say this, and I guess I'm fortunate in a way. Maybe I couldn't believe I became a writer, but sometime when I read a book I wrote, I can't believe I wrote it. I mean,
That's great. I love hearing that. I feel like clapping. I think that's great. I'm so different from that. So different. I cringe if I have to read anything that I wrote. That's not totally true. My last memoir and the one that's coming out this next year, I feel I'm not proud of myself exactly, but I feel like, okay, they're not horrible. They're okay. And I want to say something about that, because in case some of the people attending this panel are writers themselves and deal with this, I want to mention self-confidence in writing. And I think that's a really important subject for us to talk about and keep talking about. And I think that it's really difficult when we are experiencing what I call the what's the point syndrome. What's the point of writing? There's nobody standing there saying, hurry up, Judy, hurry up, Brooke, hurry up, Rosemary, write your next book. We are dying to publish it immediately. What's the point of writing? And especially those of us who write memoir, when people call it confessional, when they call it navel gazing, when it's called domestic novels, domestic books, when women write them. So I think we have to convince ourselves that the details of our lives matter.
Yes.
I really believe that. And that would be my most important message to other writers, beginning writers. The details of your life really do matter.
That comes up, we talk about this a lot in Zona Rosa, the writing groups, I've led for 40 years. And what is it to be a writer? Nobody's making us do this. Writers are, well, if you read online magazines like the Millions, which I love, and Lit Hub and so on, this is a strange profession. It's a kind of strange thing. And no one is making us do this. But a lot of the women, as Brooke mentioned earlier, a lot of the women in my writing workshops are now published authors, and they are really devoted, to that. And what makes some people devoted and not devoted, it's really, it's really wonderful when we really get into it. I think, when we really let ourselves go and let this be important to us. And here example. I can't see this way down here, but one of my students just published a book she's worked on for 20 years. I mean, it's an incredible book.
Wow.
It's called Trials of a Dead Lawyer's Wife. You can look it up on Amazon, and it's a memoir of her husband's murder, and how she sought to get that resolved. But I work with we work with lots of the people in my groups are memoirists, and we also have fiction and we have poetry. So it's a thing that is odd to be. You know?
And I think you touched on something really important too, and that's perseverance.
Mhm.
Yes, perseverance.
Perseverance.
You know,
Your student who worked on that book for 20 years, I want to say one more thing about that, about perseverance, because I love telling people this because it's meant so much to me. Fred Lebron, who's a novelist, said to me a long time ago, Judy, it's a war of attrition, don't attrish. And I think that's a great thing to remember. You touched on it with that person writing that book for 20 years. It's just stay with it. Stay with it.
well, she never stopped, and you know, she had to publish it under a pseudonym because the person who she has much evidence who killed her husband is still at large and was using her home as an address at one time, one of her former homes. So, you know, it's a really great story. And she got some great responses from literary agents, but because the person has not been brought to justice, you know, that she couldn't. But anyway, speaking of, you know, two of my books are memoirs of our group. This one's Secrets of the Zona Rosa, How Writing in Sisterhood Can Change Women's Lives. And these big books, I really, and this one came first actually. The Woman Who Spilled Words All Over Herself. And
I love that title.
yeah, that was a little second grade. When I worked for 12 years in something called Poetry in the Schools when I was first, before I published a book, I believe. And I was director for the state of Georgia for the art, you know, the arts, what do you call it? The Council of Arts and Culture. And for 2 years, and then I did it for 12 years in Georgia, South Carolina, and Wyoming. And this little boy in the second grade called me the lady who spilled poetry all over herself. and the editor said, well, that's a great phrase, but we can't use poetry because it's about all kinds of writing. But these books, I think of them as memoirs of a group, you know, because lots of these women, the women who've been in my groups, their stories are in these two books. And writing those books, I'll say, was the most fun. I mean, I really, really enjoyed writing those books. And, you know, one thing we didn't mention earlier is whether you're writing a book on contract or not for the publisher. Well, you know, several of my books, including those two books, were written on contract, and also The Hurricane Season, Fatal Flowers, and Sleeping with Soldiers. In other words, I signed the contract with the publisher before the book was written. And you probably had that experience too. Did you have that experience?
No.
Oh, you never had
No.
that experience?
No.
Oh, well, I'll
But
tell
Brooke,
you,
I want to turn it back to you and see if you had any other questions you wanted to ask. I don't want to leave you out of the equation.
Oh no, I was actually gonna see. I know you both have forthcoming books. I was gonna see if y'all could maybe read, you know, a little bit from them.
Oh,
I would have needed to.
Or just if you wanted to read from anything, I just thought, you know. But if you don't, that's fine too.
Why don't we not read? I think it's hard for people. I mean, I'm thinking of the participants too. It's hard to listen to people read, I feel like. Maybe another question that you might have, or?
Yeah, I have another question. Well, since it just kind of came out of the last conversation, we were talking a lot about memoir, and I just wanted to see what either one of you advice you might give to writers who are trying to write memoir. Because everyone I've spoken with talks about, you know, it's a challenge and how different it is writing memoir versus, you know, anything else. So is there any advice that you would give? I know Mary Karr in her book, The Art of Memoir, she says, she has a chapter where she says, don't do it. You know?
I would say the opposite. I would say do it. I think that it's a very worthwhile, important thing to do. And I'll tell you why I think it's important and worthwhile. Because what you're actually doing when you're writing memoir is you're looking to find the deepest patterns of your own life. You are the main character in your memoir. And so the reward for writing memoir is self-understanding, it's self-knowledge. And what could be more valuable than that? Of course, you're hoping to turn your personal experiences, your memories, into art, into something that might matter to somebody else. So you're always conscious of that. But I think it's a wonderful thing to do. And
what was the biggest challenge for you?
I think the best advice I could give, which grows out of the biggest challenge to me, is people are always worried about writing about people close to them. You know, what happens at Thanksgiving when you've written about your older sister and you're all sitting around the table together? I mean, that's a big concern of any memoirist. And my advice is you have to write as though everybody in your life is dead. That's what you have to do.
Exactly.
You just get it down on paper. Don't censor it between when it occurs to you in your brain and when you get it down on the page. Don't censor it. Later, after getting a draft together, after much revision, then you make decisions. Is this okay to leave in? Will I take this out? Will I give a draft of my memoir to the person I'm concerned about? If you do that, I think you have to be willing to change it if they want you to change it. So you think twice whether you want to give a copy of it before it's published to someone. But I just think it's so important not to stop yourself, not to be intimidated by hurting people's feelings or being sued. And those are two different issues, of course, but don't let that stop you. Go ahead and write the book. Only you can write.
Look, may I respond to that also?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've changed people's first names. I just usually call people first names. And there's been a lot of instances where I've changed first names. And there have been people who've become angry, very angry. But I will say one thing, that I've never had a good relationship be made bad. And if you had a bad relationship with that person, it was already bad anyway. So it really didn't make that much difference. And it's really, really important, you know, to tell your truths and get them down there. And if you think of it, like life is like this crazy house mirror, you know, this distorted. Everybody sees things differently. Like everyone in your family will see their life story differently. Like my sister is 5 years younger. We had an alcoholic father, and our mother committed suicide, and that was all happened before I wrote Fatal Flowers. So that was part of the subject matter of my book. And yet for my sister, she likes the book. She loves my writing, but people have a different view. Every person in a family has a different view of what's happening. They have a different perspective, and we're just responsible for ours, and and telling what is ours and what is our truth. And I agree with you totally. That is, Judy, it is extremely healing. You know, it is totally healing to write memoir. And you spoke about journals earlier. I've kept journals for 50 years. I write in my journal every morning, first thing when I wake up, because it's probably been the most healing thing I've done through my life. And also keep recording my dreams and recording anything that comes to me. And the memoir that I've just finished, which is not yet published, which I've spent many years on, My Beautiful Tigers, and it has a tentative subtitle, 40 Years as the Mother of an Opioid Addicted Daughter and a Schizophrenic Son. That has been the hardest one for me to write. And that has, been very, very hard, but it has turned out to, I think it's going to be, and, I don't know whether the publisher will want that subtitle, but that will be one of my most important books. And that book of poetry that Judy just mentioned, that someone just mentioned, I think it was Brooke, the Murderous Sky. I wrote that over a period of 30 years, and it was And while all these very difficult situations were going on with my two sick children, and I'd be at artist colonies or wherever, and I'd just work on those poems and telling the truth. Telling the truth is the most important thing to me. That is virtual. That is literally the most important thing to me in my writing. And I don't, Mary Carr, I didn't agree with her in what she said, by the way.
No, I don't either. I don't either. But what you said about truth is important too. I'm so glad you said that, because that is the contract that we make with our reader, is that we're going to tell the truth.
Yeah.
But also, when you start remembering things from your own life, that's when you begin distorting memory. So just understand that the act of remembering, the act of writing is an act of distorting. So you do tell the truth as well as you can.
Well,
But
all we can
truth
do
is
is
a little bit tricky.
all we can do is tell our truths. That's all we can do is tell our truths. That's all we can do.
Yeah, that's what I've told people about writing memoir, is it's not the truth, but it's a truth.
Yeah, it's someone's truth. It's my truth.
Yeah.
It's not everything.
Yeah.
You know? Right. It's like of Pat's books. I loved The Death of Santee, his last book. He wrote what I call autofiction a lot of his life. You know, it was thinly veiled, you know, autobiographical. It was autobiographical fiction, and that last book really got to me, The Death of Santee, which he tells the real truth about his relationship with his father. It just moved me so much, because I think when people tell the truth, it really, really moves other people. And, you know, the very things I thought people would not like, for example, in my first one, Fatal Flowers, that people would rush up to me and haul it, you know, it'd be a television station or somewhere, and say, oh, I had exactly that same experience. Things I'd never think that they would have had identify with at all.
You know, the other thing about being afraid of what people will think of you, if you write about them, Anne Lamott has a great quote.
Yeah.
You know that quote.
Yeah.
If people are upset about what you write about them, they should have behaved better.
Yeah.
But if
I love that.
You don't want it to be written about. You shouldn't have acted that way.
Yeah.
Exactly. Brooke, do you write?
Yes.
What do you write?
Yeah.
Memoir, poetry, fiction?
I do poetry. I have written a memoir, and I've done some fiction too. So.
All right, you're doing.
But my first love was poetry too, so I started writing that very young, and I agree. It's lends a good heart to prose when you start writing prose. It's like you can't have one without the other. But yeah.
Well, it's really good for learning great syntax and all that, you know.
Yep.
And,
yep. So I'm curious now, what are your new projects?
What are what?
Your new projects. What's going to be next? Is it going to be another memoir or?
Oh, everything starts with notes for me, and my daughter, my daughter that is in the book, A Beautiful Tiger, she passed away last November, and I'm writing. I don't know what this will turn into, but I'm writing something for notes for something called Death of a Daughter, and I'm keeping notes for that. I don't know how that will turn out yet. She is not, you know, in the end of My Beautiful Tigers, she is not dead. She has a fairly happy ending, but then she had a really difficult last, say, 4 years of her life, and so I've been writing about that. And speaking of names, I did change her name in both my poetry and The Murderous Sky, and in these books, and I call her Lily. That is not her real first name, but I know I have to write. See, I feel guided by my life to write what I write. In other words, I may not want. It may have been more fun. Look, listen. Now, this book right here was loads of fun to write. This was my second memoir. This is Sleeping with Soldiers. That's about In Search of the Macho Man. That's sort of about turning the double standard on its head. And it came out of the experience of working right before Fatal Flowers came out. There was 18 months before it came out. So I had the experience of working on an offshore oil rig. I was one of the first women to work on this offshore oil rig off the coast of Savannah. I met all these macho guys. I'd never met those kind of people in my life. And that became that book. And that was fun to write too, you know. So depends on the subject matter sometime, but that was really, I feel, I guess to go back to what I was saying, I feel that I'm guided by my life to what to write. I don't really have a choice. I mean, I don't really want to write about, I didn't have a particular desire to write about having a daughter has bipolar and opioid addict. And I didn't want to particularly write about having a son who had schizophrenia, lived with schizophrenia. He passed away also. But I didn't really have a choice. I mean, for me to write the book is healing, and I have to write that. And so now I have to go forward with what life presents to me. It's next. So some things are more fun to write about than other things. But yet,
well, like what you said about your writing guided by your life. That
yes, it is.
Makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And you know, it's not a choice really. Exactly. So
yeah, I like that. Judy, you feel the same way about
well, so in anticipation of my next memoir that's coming out in May, I really thought I was done with writing. I could not imagine writing anything else. Being led by your life, and I'm thinking, what does my life lead me to write now? I've written it all. I think I'm done. And I wasn't happy with that. I was very unhappy and unsettled with that feeling, but I honestly believed it to be true. And then all of a sudden, I see an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine. I don't know why it triggered something in me. It was an article about Juliette Binoche. So we couldn't be more dissimilar, obviously, the French actress. But something in that article triggered something in me. And like Rosemary, when I start writing a book, I start taking notes. And I started taking notes. And now I'm into writing another memoir. So I like saying that to people also, because a lot of times we really feel like we've hit bottom, or that we've scraped the bottom, that we've gone as deep as we can go, that we've done it, that we've written, and we're not going to write anymore. And then all of a sudden, we start writing again. And for me, I am much more balanced. I'm a much nicer person. People like me a lot more when I'm writing than when I'm not. And I don't blame them for not liking me when I'm not writing, because I'm just not real happy if I'm not writing. That's what keeps my life.
I feel exactly the same way. I'm the happiest times of my life when I'm totally immersed in my writing. And I don't, and I notice I do not have problems with other people when I'm immersed in my own writing.
Right, exactly.
I did a at-home writers retreat once for myself. I would usually go every August to a artist colony, and I told my daughter, who was still alive, who was living with my husband and me at that point in time, that I was going to sit at the end of this couch where I'm sitting right now every morning from 9 to 12, and I was going to write. And I was going to write from 3 to 5, and I didn't want anybody to speak to me, and I wanted it to be like I was at an artist's retreat. Well, I had seen a cartoon in the New Yorker, and the woman is saying to her husband, "Oh, this would be just like an artist's retreat if you'd bring me my meals and leave me alone all day." And I'll tell you, that was one of the nicest months of my life. I just loved it. And once I get into the writing, Oh, and this is thing, you know, we call in Zona Rosa bad hair days and good hair days. Well, bad writing days and good writing days. And, you know, there's going to be some days you feel like, oh, that was really not good what I wrote yesterday. And then you go back, look back at it the next day, and it's really, really good. You know, it can be wonderful. And
or the opposite. Sometimes you think, oh, what I did yesterday is pretty good.
Right.
And then you read it and you think, well, not so good, not so good. But
yeah,
one of our sorry.
One of our credos in Zona Rosa is revision revises us. I mean, revision, and there are no writing blocks, there are only feeling blocks. Those are two of our credos. We have many credos, but I'm a total, gosh, the revision, the book, My Beautiful Tigers, I've been working on that for many, many years, probably 14 years. And it has totally changed from the book that it was in the beginning. You know, and now I think it's 100 times better, you know, because of working hard, working on it over and over and over, and letting other people read it, people I trust. So.
Well, I was gonna, if the audience can, well, I know they can hear us, open up questions to the audience to see if they had any. I think you can post your questions in the chat box. I'm trying to see if anyone's posted I haven't seen a question in here yet. Nope.
Jane Hoover.
Anyone?
Oh, Jane. I love Jane. She have a question?
Yeah, I was just looking to see who our attendees were, and I don't see, no one's put any questions in here yet.
They may be ready to go take a walk or something.
Well, we're at the end of our hour here, but
Ryder's she's a wonderful writer. Is Zona Rosa, and she is a wonderful writer.
Hi, Rose. Brooke, I just want to say thank you so much for organizing this and guiding us. It was a lot of fun listening to your questions and answering them. And I also just want to say thank you to everybody who came. I really appreciate it.
Looks like Jane said, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you all for being here.
This has been wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad you were here, Ryder. So glad you were here. I just heard from Ryder the other day. She just got a new puppy. But she's a wonderful, wonderful writer. Okay. This has been great. So
thank you, Judy and Rosemary, both. This has been really, always love to hear writers talking about their writing. I know we ended up talking a lot about memoir, which is good because I feel like a lot of our workshops have been about memoir lately, and people have just been talking about it a lot. So
I agree. I think people are really interested in writing memoir now, more so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Brooke, and good luck to you. I just want to say to Brooke, good luck to you with your writing too.
Oh yeah. Well, like you said, it's the persistence and the, you know, it's just one of those things you can't stop doing it. So
no.
Just like you have no choice, like Rosemary said. So
bye.
Rosemary, so good to see you too.
Oh, wonderful to see you, Judy.
Take care.
Child. Really.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to your next two. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.